Chapter 80 of The Way We Live Now. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Way We Live Now by Anthony Trollope. Chapter 80. Ruby Prepares for Service. Our poor old honest friend John Crumb was taken away to durance vile after his performance in the street with Sir Felix, and was locked up for the remainder of the night. This indignity did not sit so heavily on his spirits as it might have done on those of a quicker nature. He was aware that he had not killed the baronet, and that he had therefore enjoyed his revenge without the necessity of swinging for it at Bury. That in itself was a comfort to him. Then it was a great satisfaction to think that he had served the young man out in the actual presence of his Ruby. He was not prone to give himself undue credit for his capability and willingness to knock his enemies about, but he did think that Ruby must have observed on this occasion that he was the better man of the two. And to John, a night in the station house was no great personal inconvenience. Though he was very proud of his four-post bed at home, he did not care very much for such luxuries as far as he himself was concerned, nor did he feel any disgrace from being locked up for the night. He was very good-humored with the policeman, who seemed perfectly to understand his nature, and was as meek as a child when the lock was turned upon him. As he lay down on the hard bench, he comforted himself with thinking that Ruby would surely never care any more for the baronet, since she had seen him go down like a cur without striking a blow. He thought a good deal about Ruby, but never attributed any blame to her for her share in the evils that had befallen him. The next morning he was taken before the magistrates, but was told at an early hour of the day that he was again free. Sir Felix was not much the worse for what had happened to him, and had refused to make any complaint against the man who had beaten him. John Crumb shook hands cordially with the policeman who had had him in charge, and suggested beer. The constable, with regret, was forced to decline, and bade adieu to his late prisoner with the expression of a hope that they might meet again before long. "You come down to Bungay," said John, "and I'll show you how we live there." From the police office he went direct to Mrs. Pipkin's house, and at once asked for Ruby. He was told that Ruby was out with the children, and was advised, both by Mrs. Pipkin and Mrs. Hurtle, not to present himself before Ruby quite yet. "You see," said Mrs. Pipkin, "she's a-thinking how heavy you were upon that young gentleman." "But I wasn't, not particular. Lord love you, he ain't a hair the wuss." "You let her alone for a time," said Mrs. Hurtle. "A little neglect will do her good." "Maybe," said John, "only I wouldn't like her to have it bad." "You'll let her have her wittles reg'lar, Mrs. Pipkin." It was then explained to him that the neglect proposed should not extend to any deprivation of food, and he took his leave, receiving an assurance from Mrs. Hurtle that he should be summoned to town as soon as it was thought that his presence there would serve his purposes, and with loud promises repeated to each of the friendly women that as soon as ever a line should be dropped, he would appear again upon the scene, he took Mrs. Pipkin aside and suggested that if there were any extras he was ready to pay for them. Then he took his leave without seeing Ruby, and went back to Bungay. When Ruby returned with the children, she was told that John Crumb had called. "I thought as he was in prison," said Ruby,